Well, that was perfect timing. I was just about to start this and the aircon kicked in. Oh well. Ladies and gentlemen, we are 2 weeks away from the start of the World Cup in France. And in the penultimate weekend of World Cup warm-up games this past week, South Africa put their marker down against New Zealand emphatically in Twickenham, beating them comfortably. Fiji beating England for the very first time. England losing to a Tier 2 nation, although you can't really consider Fiji a Tier 2 nation anymore. Ireland narrowly escapes the clutches of Samoa, and France gives Eddie Jones a further headache as he goes 5 losses on the trot. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Chip Over the Top Rugby Podcast. My name is Ryan, and if you are new here, welcome. And if you've been here before, welcome back. Today, I discuss the weekend's actions that have just happened, both on the international stage and locally. You might be wondering what I'm referring to by locally. Well, I myself had a game on the weekend. I say a game, I had a mini tournament. And then in Glendale, Colorado, there was a sevens tournament, Rugby Town Sevens. And obviously pre-season is back in swing, back over the pond in Wales and in the UK as well. So before we get into that, make sure you hit the thumbs up button. Feel free to subscribe if you like this video and you like the content. It does help massively. And also welcome to my new little backdrop here. It's not really a new backdrop, it's my old backdrop, but I put up the flag, albeit not the best. And that little book right there that you can't really see because it's backwards is the book that I'm also using to learn some Welsh, because as the Welsh guy in America, I do feel it imperative that I also learn the native tongue. Because unfortunately, back at GCSE level, I opted to learn French instead of continue my studies for Welsh. But it is what it is. Anyway, so yeah, thumbs up and make sure you hit that subscribe, please. Diolch Yn Fawr. Okay, so this weekend, let me just talk about the tournament that I was in. So it was a tournament in Washington, D.C. It was pretty cool, actually. It was under the shadows of the Washington Monument. If you're familiar with Washington, D.C., if you're not, just look it up on a map, or I'll just pull it up right here for you. Basically, there's a rugby field right in Washington, D.C., right next to the mall, under the shadow of the Washington Monument. It was pretty cool to play there. It was a mini tournament. One of the DC teams had like a 10th year anniversary, only been around for 10 years. So a couple of teams, 3 others, 4 total, including ours, were invited to go and play in this tournament. And it was pretty good for us because not only did we come away with the win on the tournament, we did win all 3 games comfortably. We do have a lot of new players this year, which is a good thing, but also a negative thing, because the team that I play for is associated with a military base, kinda. So we have lots of military guys coming in, Navy in particular, coming in, and every so often they'll get new deployment or new placements almost, I guess. So they just bounce around the country. So if you get a guy, we've had several over the years, you know, the turnover rate every 3-4 years, there's a new bunch coming in. So it's kind of hard to stay consistent. So right now we're in like a rebuild kind of phase. We've lost a couple guys this past season that have gone, elsewhere around the country, and we've got about 7 new guys that have come in who some have played in high school, some have never played before, and some wouldn't even know the sport existed unless we did some recruiting events and whatnot. So that's kind of good to grow the sport of rugby here in America and locally, but it's also quite frustrating when you are you're building that cohesion and that partnership, like 12-13 partnership or 9-10 partnership or even a front row partnership. For example, you learn the players around you and you kind of get used to it. So getting new players coming in is kind of annoying, but it's part and parcel. Like I said, we had 7 new guys at this tournament, but they all played very well and fit in nicely. And it was kind of nice to throw them in against, I don't want to say less than stellar competition, but kinda. So it was a nice entry into the season. Our season kicks off in 2 weeks, so fun times. Yeah, and I had a dabble. I think I played 2 games, tweaked my hamstring a little bit, but it was also 32 fucking degrees Celsius as well, like 90 plus Fahrenheit. So I didn't want to, push it. Hamstring feels good right now anyway, so it was just a little tweak. But I thought, better not push it for the start of the season. So yeah, happy days. But it was so this is one of the things I really want to touch upon before we get into the meat and potatoes of this video, is that in America, rugby is not kind of like the forefront sport. You're also competing with the top 4 sports in America. So American football, basketball, baseball, probably lacrosse here where I live in the area, but also soccer, football, right? It's tough to get people involved in rugby. So what's also frustrating on that end is that there's not really any sort of designation coming down from the top. Back home in Wales, WRU puts funding in place for new clubs and clubs, for example, and they have regional support officers, regional development officers to kind of bring the sport about and get it to where the standard it needs to be, or just get people involved. But in America, there is no thing like that. It's kind of falls back onto the local clubs, the grassroots clubs, because even the professional teams in the areas, they have their academies and they do their thing and whatnot, but it doesn't necessarily filter down to all the clubs in the area. So it's kind of one of those things where if you want to grow the sport, you have to be so goddamn diligent and active and proactive in doing that. One of the downsides is that rugby is not really in public school settings either, so I think that needs to change. But hopefully something happens soon, because if you didn't know, USA is hosting the 2031 and 2033 Men's and Women's World Cup. So I fingers crossed that something comes down the pipeline soon to put funding in place to develop the regional game and the grassroots game, and hopefully that interest will stick. But there we are. That was enough on my tournament. Rugby Sevens, ladies and gentlemen, descended on Glendale, Colorado, home of USA Rugby, if you did not know that. In a Rugby Town Sevens, it's not really kind of like the Premier Sevens that you've just had. It's kind of like a step down, like a tier down, maybe more than a tier down. But teams around the world came, and I do believe the USA under-23s team came away with the win on that one. There was a couple of British teams, there was a couple of European teams, lots of American teams, and a bunch of military forces, I think, as well. And I do think the UK had an infantry regiment sevens team that entered that. No idea how they did. All I know is that U23 USA came away with a win on that one. So, yeah, still a good competition though, if you enjoy sevens, but not my cup of tea. Obviously, 15 seasons is in full swing right now. I was getting to it, and we're on the brink of the World Cup, which brings us into the World Cup penultimate warm-up games that just took place. Oh, what a weekend, ladies and gentlemen. I said it was going to be a weekend and a half, and it turned out to be absolutely just that. South Africa put their marker down on the World Cup, heading into the World Cup, the last warm-up game before they make their title defense, their championship defense. Don't forget, South Africa did win in 2019, beating England in the final. They put a big win in against New Zealand, winning 35 points to 7 in Twickenham. So as a neutral, it was probably an incredible game to watch live. I watched it personally myself, and I thought it was a fantastic game overall. However, there were a few things that did cause a bit of controversy, as we do know. And it seems to be the case, this World Cup warm-up, like build-up, right? Obviously, we've had lots of red cards, lots of yellow cards, and it was no different in this game. In the first 15 minutes, New Zealand went down to 13 players. Sam Cane and Scott Barrett both getting yellow carded in the first 15 minutes. Just South Africa hounding the line, and the referee giving lots and lots of warnings to New Zealand and say, hey, I'm going to card you if this keeps happening. And lo and behold, it kept happening. South Africa kept dominating in their 22. And yeah, they went down big time to 13 players. Eventually, you know, South Africa is just going to take full advantage of that. A team like South Africa, like, is what Wales should have done against England, but we just weren't as clinical as South Africa. This team was probably one of the more experienced and better teams that South Africa could have put out. So they're not going to let you off that easy at that point. And also a important note to make is that Lebok, the fly half for South Africa, actually did well on kicking duties as well, because in the week prior he was struggling. But fingers crossed, because obviously you can't win games without a fly half kicking well. I mean, you can, but it makes it a little bit more difficult in those clutch situations. To see that he was on form would be a confidence booster going into the World Cup for South Africa and him, of course. And lo and behold, like I said, it was a weekend full of controversy. During that game, we had a red card as well. So New Zealand, for the majority of the second half, or most of the second half actually, in fact, all the second half, we're down to 14 players. And obviously a team like South Africa is just going to capitalize on that, and they're going to pounce. South Africa came away with a win, 35 points to 7. Like I said, as a neutral, it was good to watch, but interesting to see New Zealand getting absolutely hammered like that, especially this close to the World Cup warm-up. World Cup in general, you know what I'm saying? And France will be very happy to see that, because, as we all know, France is opening up the World Cup against New Zealand on September 8th, and that is going to be an absolute stormer of a World Cup opener. And I, for one, cannot wait. Now, before we get into the big one of the weekend, let's talk about the other results. Italy seeing off Japan 42 points to 21, which I think Italy are going to be ecstatic about, but I think there's going to be some disappointment for the Japs. And I say that because obviously in 2019, with them beating South Africa and getting to their high point, it's going to be it's a little bit more challenging for them to come back and bounce back to get to those heights. And is it a possibility the reasoning behind that is due to more international players actually applying their trade now in Japan, which you look at it with the MLR, for example, right? It's going to boost the standard overall of the game, but then you're missing out on the funding opportunity and also the possibility of having a homegrown player fill that role and become something like a household name, for example. Is that an issue? Possibly. Is that going to stop things? No, unfortunately not. Argentina put in 62 points on Spain, which I think was expected. We didn't expect Spain to do much against a full-strength Argentina squad. And Scotland coming back from 6-0 half-time down to Georgia to come away with the win, 33 points to 6, of which I'm sure they're going to be happy going into the World Cup, because they quite possibly have the hardest group to get out of, both Ireland and South Africa in their group. But I think Scotland do fancy their chances, so we shall see. Another big game, Samoa pushing Ireland to the brink. Ireland narrowly coming away with the win, 17 points to 13. Conor Murray getting the last try as well, which will be good for him going into the World Cup. Ireland also named their 33-man squad. Johnny Sexton is captain. Cian Healy unfortunately misses out due to injury, but McCloskey's in, which I think is good for him at 12. I think he's a 12. Yeah, and we're obviously going to touch upon the World Cup squads going into it, like players to watch out for and stuff like that, and give my thoughts on the whole squads that we have thus far. And France, ladies and gentlemen, put in an absolute swan song performance, a final send-off before they make their opener against New Zealand on the 8th, like I've already said. They beat Australia comfortably, 41 points to 17. Like I said, giving Eddie Jones a further headache, because that is 5 losses on the bounce for him. And it's an interesting squad that Eddie Jones has. As we know, there's only one true out-and-out fly half in that squad. So it'll be interesting to see if they can turn it around heading into the World Cup. because obviously they're in the same pool as Wales and Fiji. And after that result, you would probably argue that Fiji and Wales fancy their chances against Australia. And that group is very, very close. If you look at the world rankings right now, Fiji ahead of Wales and Australia, and then Georgia coming up in the rear, and obviously Portugal not quite there yet, but making up the rest of that group. So interesting times. Here is the big one, ladies and gentlemen. The big one. I never thought, in fact, I did. In the past 2 decades, England have gone from winning the World Cup in 2003, finalists in 2019, and this past weekend, losing to Fiji for the very first time. Is England on the brink of possibly not even making it out of the group stages? I mean, I think they will. Obviously, they have Argentina first. There's a possibility they're going to lose that game. They also have Japan in the group. Could Japan beat them? Could they upset England? I doubt it. I don't think so, but you never know with the Japanese. They do have it in them. They beat South Africa. Let's all not forget that one. That was historic. But on the weekend, this was even more historic. England has never lost to a quote-unquote Tier 2 nation before. Now, you can't really argue that Fiji are a Tier 2 nation anymore, based on that performance, based on where they're at in the world rankings, and based on the talent that they have. The only downside I have with Fiji is I think their talent pool at 15s level is a little small. Granted, they only have 1 million population, but they do have the Fijian Drua, which is playing in Super Rugby right now, which is absolutely incredible. And I think 18 of the Fijian World Cup squad play for them. And obviously there's players like Semi Radrada, who are applying their trade, and Botia in the English Prem, and Matavela, the hooker, Matavala, I believe, or however you pronounce his name. I do apologize if I butchered it. I think I got it right on one of those three. Playing exceptionally well for Saracens as well. So there is lots of talent in Fiji. So this was never unquestionable. You just look at them on the 7 circuit. They are absolutely incredible. They call the flying Fijians for a reason, because they can fly across the board from 1 to 15. They are fantastic. And they put in a massive performance against England. England just did not look like they knew what they were doing until Marcus Smith came on. He added a little bit more oomph to that game. It was a good first half overall, but Fiji just wanted it more. It was that simple. And there was a couple of things that Fiji did in order for them to get the upset. Number one, I've already said it, they wanted it more. They did want to win that game. You could see it in their eyes, in the passion after the game when they were just going round. And when they were staying on the field to just speak to their fans and supporters, and they got in a little huddle and sang. That was fucking incredible. Number two, they had constant support on their attacking line. You look at it, every time they had a break, there was someone there with them. Number three, they showed up with an actual game plan. Usually Fiji have passed, and you listen to it all the time. The commentators say, we'll just wait for Fiji to tire. We'll wait for their set piece to fall to pieces. That's improved. Their set piece, their scrummaging, their lineouts are actually functioning and working well. They have game plan. Caleb Muntz is playing well. He's dictating the play. He's kicking for territory if they need to. And they're not afraid to do that. Before, they would probably try and run and play that flair kind of rugby from within their 22. But now they're like, no, we're going to play smart. We're actually going to play strategically. We're going to kick for territory. We're going to kick for points. And we're going to beat teams down. And they have proven it in the Pacific Cup, beating Japan, Samoa, Tonga, and now beating England. And that just makes the Group C, Pool C for the World Cup that much more interesting. Now, personally, I still think Wales can beat Fiji with the squad that we have. And I'm going to make a separate video on that, separate episode, discussing the team that I think Warren Gatland will and should probably pick based on the game that we're going to need to play overall. And it was kind of it was kind of funny, right? Hats off to Fiji. But moving on ever so slightly, Warren Gatland and the Welsh coaching staff were in the crowd, and that got picked up upon. And there was lots of memes floating around. This one right here in particular, where it was like, oh, Wales worried, we just saw that, now we're going to lose, blah, 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 all over the internet. But of course, if anyone can master plan a way to beat a team based on the players that we have, look, he's seen enough. He's seen France beat Fiji last weekend. He's seen New Zealand and other teams beat them. He talked about the Crusaders beating the Fijian Drua in the Super Rugby and how they play, and how like most of the team that are in the Fijian team play for them. So a similar play style will do wonders. He is the man that can do it. And I think, like I've said, Wales do have the squad and the depth in order to overcome Fiji and make a push for at least the semi-finals. You heard it here first. Now, what was your favourite moment of this weekend? Leave me a comment, because obviously there were lots of games that happened. There were lots of moments of interest that happened. Personally, my favourite was obviously seeing England lose to Fiji. As a Welshman, that's the best, right? But yeah, if you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. It does help. I do appreciate it. Leave a comment below. And as always, make sure you hit that subscribe button for more content coming soon. Like I said, I'm going to touch upon the Welsh squad to face Fiji. I'm going to touch upon the squad announcements, players to watch for in the World Cup of my interest, and maybe you think the same. So yeah, hit subscribe, hit that thumbs up. Diolch Yn Fawr. Chip over the top podcast done. Actually put in a couple chips over the top in the games on the weekend. It was quite funny. I just fancy trying it. It must be the podcast in my head. I was like in open space, had a winger approaching me, chipped over the top. Their fullback, he knocked it on, which was great. Picked up the ball to recover. I offloaded it because I was stumbling a little bit. But unfortunately, my support man knocked it on. But it was okay. We went back to the previous scrum. Yeah, it was just a good game. Just fun weekend for me playing. It was nice to have some fun on the field, even though, like I said, it was hot as balls. But that's all, folks. Diolch Yn Fawr. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for listening. Thumbs up, subscribe. Peace. See you in the next one. Diolch Yn Fawr.